All right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining our Public Lands Advocacy Masterclass. We'll get going in just a couple minutes here. We want to give everybody time to get logged in and get situated. So a couple of housekeeping items while we wait. First off, your audio and video are turned off, so we can't see or hear you. So no worries if you have noise in the background or anything like that. This class is being recorded, so if you have to duck out early and you want to go rewatch watch the portion you missed, or just rewatch the whole thing or send it to a friend, we will email you the recording link. We'll upload it to the YouTube channel tomorrow, and we'll send you an email tomorrow evening with that recording link. If you do have questions, we want this to kind of be an interactive class and answer as many questions as you have. There's a Q&A box down below. That's the best spot to put your questions. There's also a chat box. Chat is great just to let us know, who you are, where you're tuning in from. Questions do tend to get lost in there. It's just not really built for a good Q&A. So if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A box down below. And then, like almost all of our onX master classes, we are going to do a giveaway at the end of the class just to thank you for being here. We got some onX swag we're going to give away, so we'll put that link in the chat towards the end of the class there. So with that, my name's Jack Headland. I will be kind of leading from the onX side of things here, but I believe everyone's probably here to see Mr. Ryan Callaghan. Cal, how are things going this evening?
Oh boy, just like we were talking about, I'm way behind on getting serious about hunting season. Uh, too much other stuff going on. A lot of distractions these days, Jack.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, yep,
And
but
so,
I'm really looking forward to it.
so for folks that don't know, you're involved kind of in public lands advocacy a couple different ways. Your title at Meat Eater, you're Director of Conservation. Is that correct?
Yep,
And you're also the chair of the North American Board for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers.
yep, that's correct. Yeah,
So
yeah,
you're living this kind of stuff.
yeah, for sure. And then through a couple different nonprofits, I'm also on steering committees for brands for public lands and hunt brands for public lands as well. So um, that's kind of some of the stuff that we'll get into tonight, right? Is community matters. And one community, like the hunting community, I believe was absolutely pivotal in win something just on our own, right? We got to build big, broad, diverse coalitions.
You did cut out there a little bit, but I don't know if it was just on my end or not, but I think we got most of what we needed. So let's maybe kind of talk about, earlier this year. Let's maybe start there just to kind of get everybody up to speed. We had a couple different proposals, one in the US House of Representatives, and then later one in the Senate that we're going to try to dispose of or transfer or sell. You hear those kind of three words thrown around a bunch, and they can mean different things, I guess, depending who they're coming from and who you are. Do you mind just running us through kind of the history of what we just went through and what we defeated?
Yeah, absolutely. So, sorry, I'm moving closer to the router here, trying to be proactive.
Sounds good.
Um, yeah, what we saw was um, kind of the whole political process in a relatively short amount of time. So, um, and this is just on the federal side of things. There's a previous push that coincided, not coincidentally, with the election cycle, the campaign season. It's a good time to bury things, important things, um, when there's just serious passion in politics going on. But once the elections were decided, then we saw a lot of conversation around land sell-off, public land sell-off, disposal, transfer, and then it got narrowed down to sales. And it started in the House, and there was a group of representatives that put in some language in the budget reconciliation process, right? Starts in the House and then moves up to the Senate, um, to sell public lands. And that's basically as vague as it was. So we knew it was going to be lands that were previously marked for disposal. We didn't know if it was going to be in the Bureau of Land Management or U.S. Forest Service, more than likely Bureau of Land Management, but it could be anything federal. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Reclamation, you know, I think it's a good indicator of how a lot of people in elected offices think of public lands. When you heard, and we still hear, don't worry, we're not going to sell our national parks, right? Because that's what they associate with public lands. I'm assuming most of the folks that have signed in tonight, we probably do a lot of recreation outside of our national parks, and relatively little compared to most folks who may head out to a national park on Memorial Day or Labor Day weekend. So eventually, and onX came in huge here during the fight in the House to get this language removed. We were able to identify lands that were marked for disposal. It may not have been the land specifically outlined in the language that would eventually come out, but it was what we're seeing now, land that has been marked for sale since, you know, the 70s for the most part. Largely Bureau of Land Management. When that land was removed in the House, or I'm sorry, when that language was removed in the House, there was a little bit of cause for celebration, because the only reason it was removed is because people were going, oh my gosh, this is actually happening. And we were making posts on social media, believe it or not, tagging our representatives. We were talking to businesses saying, why aren't you talking about this on your channels? If you're an outdoor business, this affects you. You better get on board. And we were picking up the phones and writing the emails and directly engaging with our elected representatives. It absolutely would have stayed in, despite the minority opposition of some largely Democrat and a handful of Republican representatives, like our guy here in Montana, Montana Representative Ryan Zinke, who's really vocal from the absolute get-go about his position on the sale of public lands, which is awesome to see. We want to see more of it. So then when the budget reconciliation process moved over to the Senate, enter Senator Mike Lee. Mike Lee is a very dangerous guy in this process, because he's also the chair of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. As a committee chair, he really does get to more or less dictate. It would be odd for him. It would be odd for a committee to read something vote on something, discuss something that the committee chair isn't in favor of. Let's put it that way. So that's why I say Mike Lee's a very dangerous guy in this scenario, because he can really influence the other members of that committee. Even members that are near as senior as him. So he introduces language in the Senate that broadly outlines the sale of public lands. Again, people are like, well, what public lands and where? And there's a little bit of confusion onto how this is going to shake out. And then we saw maps, this time provided by the Wilderness Society, that outline all of the land that could be potentially up for sale using the language that Mike Lee and his staff provided. So then everybody got to look at what's kind of on the chopping block, right? And a lot of those places, when they were outlined in the 70s, didn't have roads to them, were under different management practices. They made that list for reasons in the 70s that don't apply now. So could have been on there for good reasons in the 70s. They have changed a lot and have become near and dear to a lot of outdoor recreationists' heart, bird watchers, every skiers. There's a lot of value to those places. And conversely, there are some small places out there that do fit to kind of the letter of the law. The outlines for proper sale of public land. And when I say proper sale of public land, it is to like surgically address a need versus like these big Doge chainsaw cuts, right? We're talking like the scalpel and the tweezers, surgically addressing a need for a community, typically, to allow for safety, growth, water quality, things of that nature. And then the revenue from the sale of those pieces go back into a fund that is earmarked for the to acquire land of greater strategic value. So that's what the American people have voted on. That's what our whole political process has defined as the proper way to dispose of America's public lands, right? It's in a means to address a very specific need. When that need arises, there's a public comment period, and then the revenues, there's some disbursement locally, but then the bulk of the revenues go back into acquiring land of greater strategic value for the American people. So we got to look at those lands, and we saw like wildfire, right? It was like a true bandwagon moment. And like I said earlier, I know, I don't just think, but I know the hunting and angling community was the absolute tip of the spear. We were the most vocal group from the absolute onset, and we were able to mobilize in a way that fired up all these other communities. And I'm not building a hierarchy here. It's just that the hunting and angling community was first, and we couldn't do it alone. Every other community that jumped on board and got fired up was part of this big puzzle that eventually put the Senate in a position to get that language removed, put Mike Lee in a position to where he had to remove that language. And I shouldn't just say the Senate, because the House was still getting enough phone calls, emails, social pressure to where the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, was going to the Speaker of the Senate, Thune, to let him know, please don't let this come back to the House, because if it does, we will not accept it. So it was as good as we can make it for a reactive situation, right? Like ideally, none of this ever would have happened. We were reactive, not proactive. Um, we'd like to be proactive the next time around. Um, but at the end of the day, that language was removed, and public lands right now they do have a sticker on them with a valuation, a price tag, and that's something that we need to be aware of, because this isn't going away. We just kind of won that first battle, or got through that first chapter.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remind folks like this isn't the first time this has happened. We can go back to the 80s and the Sagebrush Rebellion, to when I first kind of became aware of this issue. I grew up in central Minnesota, which Minnesota has a lot of public lands. I wasn't quite aware of what that meant, to be quite honest, until, probably 2014, I think, was that about when Congressman Chaffetz was kind of doing the same kind of thing, talking about disposal and transfer, and that's when my eyes really opened up. So this isn't a brand new fight, and we'll be fighting it for the foreseeable future. Um, it might be helpful to kind of go into the people that are in favor of disposing of these lands. What's their argument? Why are they saying, no, this is a good thing? We want to transfer, dispose of, sell these lands.
There's several different arguments out there. Some based on constitutionality, some based off of the GDP, the national debt. Um, some based off of productivity, like those lands aren't doing anything, they're not productive. They need to be developed into uh, a myriad of things, right? So um, there's several different arguments out there. At this point in the game, it's can just be boiled down to profit generation for something or someone. If you look at the value of America's public lands from a national defense perspective, food security perspective, clean water perspective, none of these other arguments hold any sort of water. In fact, they lose water, because without our public lands, we don't drink. So there's all sorts of passionate people when you get into any of these subjects.
Mhm.
But that's kind of a brief overview of what's out there.
Yeah, you talk about holding water, and especially in the West, that's always top of mind for people. I think it was Hal Herring on the BHA podcast. I can't remember the exact stat, but it was something like 60% of people in the West, their drinking water originates on national forest. You might have better stat, but when you think about that, do I want that sold off to the highest bidder who now controls the headwaters of, whatever creek that or reservoir that my city gets its drinking water from? It's kind of a scary proposition.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm sitting here in old Los Angeles, and um, that's absolutely where our water comes from, right? It's
Mhm.
all largely snowpack generated. It's all public, and we literally have municipal dams built on federal land in these watersheds. And that is how Bozeman drinks.
Yeah. Well, let's talk, you know, talk moving forward. We've got a few questions in the Q&A we might dip into. So Nate asked what I think is a pretty good question. He said, I live in a state and district where my local, state, and federal representatives all support public lands. What can I do to help fight and advocate for public lands?
That's great. That's a perfect situation to be proactive in. Um, those people, even though they are on your side on these issues, they're getting pulled in a bunch of different directions that aren't focusing on these issues. So it's still really important to try to spend some time with these folks and their staff for sure. Staffers matter. Um, and find those proactive opportunities, whether it's creating easements, um, building those coalitions, trying to see who else you can get on board for good projects. Most projects I run across are good. That's why I go like this. Um, and you know that was the situation that I was certainly in here in the last days of the Senate fight. Is I was being told directly that um, Daines and Sheehy and Downing were on the side of public lands on this. And so that was my ask. I was like, well, great. Can you please tell Senate Majority Leader John Thune, or the Speaker of the Senate, um, that we need him on our side too. Try to recruit, see who else you can get, and I think thank yous are always a huge deal. Um, Folks don't get a lot of thank yous. It's always, what else can you do? So when you're in that fortunate position of having representatives and senators that are voting your way, it's really important to reach out there and say, hey, I noticed that you're voting this way, and I just want to say thank you and reinforce the reasons why you're saying thank you.
Here's another question from another gentleman named Jack that I think is pretty good and it's somewhat along the same lines. Um, Kind of a two-part question. For someone like myself working on a project about public lands and conservation, what landscapes or communities do you think are underrepresented in this conversation? And second, what do you believe is the best method to get the conversation outside our community, which can sometimes feel like an echo chamber? And that's something I've thought about too, is class like this is great, but we might be preaching to the choir a bit and we need to bring other folks into the fold.
Yeah, absolutely. That piece that I kind of zipped through on community and coalition building, you would really need to take those opportunities or seek out those opportunities to speak with different groups. So be searching for any of those events that could get you in front of folks that you're not already talking to. I'm kind of in a fortunate position where I can make that happen fairly easy, but I need to talk with the agricultural community uh, as much, if not more, than the hunting community, as well as the skiers, the mountain bikers, the off-roaders, right? And every group kind of has its rendezvous, its get together, and even if it's not your deal, it's worth going out to because I find typically that most folks like the center of the Venn diagram is the same if they're outdoors people. Doesn't matter if you're a rancher or a hunter. At the end of the day, you really like being outside, or you wouldn't be doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And
And
then as far as like who is underrepresented, I don't want to gloss that over. If you're
mhm.
looking around the room, I mean, it's pretty darn in your face. If something seems really, really important and uh, you're in that town hall or county commission meeting or fishing game meeting, you can look around, and if everybody looks like you know who's not represented, right? Or and look like you can be everybody's wearing the same type of fishing shirt, then the upland bird hunters aren't there, right? Or nobody's wearing white's boots, the loggers aren't there. So um, it, all those demographics matter at especially on a big fight like we just had.
Yeah. And you talked about, reaching out to people in the community. I'd like to remind people, like, you can start small. I don't know if my father had ever contacted a member of his congressional delegation in his 67 years on this planet, not to let everyone know how old he is. But I remember talking to him on the phone, and he lives in central Minnesota where I grew up, and said, "Hey, Dad, you should send an email. I'll send you the links for everything you need to do, but email your representative, let him know this is a bad deal and he needs to oppose it." And he said, "Okay, I will." And he sent me a text 5 minutes later that he sent the email. Stuff like that, I think a lot of times in the social media age, a lot of us think like, well, I don't have the reach of a Ryan Callaghan. What can I really do? But family and friends, neighbors, when stuff like this comes up that might not be top of mind, I think if you can get five more people to send an email or make a call, if everybody on this call can do that, that's a couple thousand more people that we've influenced. That's not nothing.
Oh, absolutely. I looking back on this last one, I was like, oh my God, we should have gone down to the old folks' homes and chatted with those folks. They would have loved it, and would have made some phone calls and shot off some emails too. So uh,
Mhm.
it's always a really good reminder to me when you start asking around your inner circle, your close friend circle, how many people have made a phone call versus an email, and then just trying to ask them to take that next step. Or we're all linked up on Bluetooth driving around these days. Just be like, cool, I'm going to call my representative right now, and you can just show them how painless and easy it is.
Let's see. There's a ton of good questions in here. Um, Jared asked a pretty good one. So we've kind of talked about what we did. We were being reactive. What should we be doing now? Is there anything that you're aware of? I believe Representative Zinke has introduced a bill to stop the sale of public lands. Is it the Public Lands and Public Lands Act? What could we do to be on the offense to try to prevent bad legislation like this from entering the fray again?
I mean, just staying engaged, right? Like, it is abnormal for a lot of these offices to get more than a few phone calls or emails a day. Um, so, you can really stand out if and it's important, right? Like, I know we don't like spam emails, but getting those newsletters from groups you like and groups you don't like, as well as your elected officials that you like and don't like, it can be really, really telling. When I was living in Idaho, um, I'm still on Mike Simpson's email list, and he ends a lot of his emails with surveys like, "Do you
Mhm.
think I should do this?" And it's nothing to fill out the survey. So that's kind of part of that being informed thing. Most of these things don't take very long at all to read. I'm sure AI is summing them up for you pretty nicely. Um, Letting these people know that you're paying attention is huge. It really is, and remembering those staffers' names is awesome too, because it forces them to kind of get out of the routine and be like, "Oh my God, that whoever this is, I don't remember them, but they remember me."
Hmm.
Is a big deal. So yeah, the Public Lands and Public Hands Act uh, is a great one to be asking about. North American Grasslands Conservation Act is a huge one to be asking about. Um, there's definitely some good stuff out there, but just if you're talking about the federal level, it is totally your duty to say, "Hey, I was out on federal land and I saw this and this positive thing or this negative thing," and it's it should just be kind of like a part of what you do, right? If maybe you're a journal person and you're writing down what you did this weekend, you can always end up with kind of a call into your rep or senator and let them know what you saw out there. So um, there's still land sale um, talk going on, and that's where you need to. I think onX's newsletter is absolutely fantastic. I really do. Not just pumping their tires because I'm on the platform right now, but also, TRCP, BHA, National Wildlife Federation, um, Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, RMEF. They're doing a great job on keeping people informed here. So, and like you see a lot more organizations talking about public lands, and that's because they noticed that their membership was really engaged, and this was a hip hot topic, and they want to be as relevant as possible. So that's a good indicator that people are paying attention to.
Yeah, I just got a survey from the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. They do that, I think, once a year. I always fill it
Yep.
out and they ask, what are the top issues that you see facing hunting and that you'd like us to advocate for? And I always check, public lands and access to public lands as one of those things. So they've got those big organizations, those national organizations certainly have a voice, and the membership of that organization definitely has a say in what they're talking about, you know, when they're meeting with folks. Um, you mentioned there was a couple questions in there. People were asking about organizations, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, National Wildlife Federation. There's a bunch of good ones. Your kind of species specific ones, like you mentioned, RMEF, Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever.
Trout Unlimited did a
Trout
great
Unlimited
job.
was big. And
Yep.
what I'll tell people is if you're not, you should become a member of those organizations if you can. Usually it's like 35 bucks, 40 bucks a year. If you can't, most of them have a newsletter that's free. You can just enter your email address and they will send you, sometimes it's weekly, monthly, just an email newsletter of kind of what's going on and what they're doing. That's a great place to start to be informed. We're pulled in every direction. There's so much information out there. Those are good places to get some, good news about the things you care about, with some pretty good facts, and then some pretty good, hey, here's how you can make your voice heard. Whether it's send an email or a call, or there's a commission meeting this weekend, or probably not on the weekend, but next week that in near your town that you should show up at.
Yeah, and I do want to emphasize like the business side of this as well. Um, I'm very, very fortunate position, right, to be on this onX platform, and I'm employed by Meat Eater, and Meat Eater, our brands, First Light, we've always been very outspoken on these topics. Most brands uh, have started engaging more on a one-on-one basis, which isn't new anymore, but it was at a time. And when you're out there making purchases and you see other brands actively engaged, um, you should question those other brands and tell them to get on board with this stuff. Because behind the scenes, a lot of times behind the scenes, not always, we're as business owners and business representatives, we're working to put together coalitions to say, hey, this is what our customer base depends on. And this is what it means for our employees and for our businesses in these states and regions. And we're making that economic case. And you know, it was there was a time like on the First Light side of things that we were really, really unique in the hunting space for being so outspoken about these things. And that's not the case anymore. And that's not a loss from a business perspective. That was the whole point. Like we need people to get engaged on every level: the business, the individual, the group, the nonprofit, and obviously the our political appointees and representatives, our electeds.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm trying to find the right way to phrase this. You know, when you look at the um, hunting industry in specific, where sometimes it's a little bit difficult to really advocate because we feel like we don't always have a party necessarily. Um, and I don't know if I've told you before we jumped on, but for the audience, I used to be a social studies teacher before I worked at onX. I taught 4 years in Minnesota public schools, and I would sometimes remind students, like, just because you voted for somebody doesn't mean you have to agree with them 100%, and it doesn't mean you have to go along with them. In fact, if you're somebody who voted for a senator, a congressperson that was going to vote to sell off public lands, you might have more of a voice. You might say, hey, I voted for you and I agree with you on many things, but you're wrong on this. That might get their attention more than somebody who, never had their vote to begin with. Because when they're in danger of losing votes, that could get them to stand up a little bit, and that's a difficult thing to do. The cognitive dissonance is not always the easiest to overcome there. That's just something I think on a lot of issues it is good to not just go along 100% with whatever the person says, and say you can agree with somebody on some things and disagree on other things, and that's how a good democracy works, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the tough part of the job, right? Is we're never off the clock, right? So
Right.
that election cycle is only one part of the calendar, and we got to be on 24/7, you know. So it is absolutely part of the hunting package in my mind that we got to weigh in on all of this stuff, not just when it's in our backyard, you know.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk, a few questions, people talking about what do we need to be aware of coming up? What are upcoming issues, things that maybe are out in public right now, or things that you've maybe heard that are kind of boiling under the surface that are ready to come out, you know, to come out in public. Um, so I guess first, what's coming up? What should we be on the lookout for? And then, what can we do to prevent sales and bad things from happening again?
Well, this is a really interesting time because there isn't a proliferation of accurate information. There are a lot of ideas out there, but like, trust me when I say you don't want to get sucked into the hyperbole. And if you're screaming that the house is on fire all the time, pretty soon people lose interest in the house being on fire, right? Or fire takes on a different meaning
Yeah, we can't be
than
the
it,
boy who cried wolf.
right. So it is challenging to keep people engaged um, without like that hard call to action. But we are hearing um, and seeing in fact, so like the idea of the rescission of the roadless rule. So that is 58 million acres, I believe. This is the conversation largely lies within forestry. Now, that's a bit of a misdirect and misnomer because there's also mineral extraction as well. So, active forest management is something that we've advocated for a long time, which is everything from prescribed burns. And, as hunters, we all know that early successional growth that comes behind a fire is like the best thing in the world for growing animals and having a real banger hunting season and for multiple seasons to come as that fresh growth regenerates. Um, and and that can come along too with logging operations. So um, that's one part of this puzzle. There's only about 20% of that 60 million acres, let's just say 60 million, right around 20 million, 19 million acres that have uh, timber management plans, pre-existing timber management plans to the designate prior to the designation of the roadless rule. Um, Outside of that, you're looking at a big chunk of ground that lacks that pre-existing management plan. It's going to take about 18 months to get one in place. And what that will look like would be anybody's guess. But some of this is going to be suitable for marketable timber harvest. Some of this is not. Um, when we talk about mineral extraction, then we're really talking about something that has a larger effect on hunting that can affect, sometimes generations to come, right? So, West Virginia, spent some time in West Virginia this spring. It was a phenomenal recreation state, but every inch of the public ground that we were running around on was absolutely decimated. Um, there was no reason to even think about hunting or fishing out there because it was just completely strip mined. Um, Now some of it's gorgeous, at least to me, a Montana kid going out there, and I'm like, oh my God, everything's green. Um, it's not quite back to those big hardwood forests that were the predecessor to what I was seeing, but it does have great wildlife, and the fishing was darn good too. So, um, but when we talk about the multiple use mandate of our public lands, something that we celebrate, one of the things that you give up when you want to take minerals from the ground, right, is you're going to give up access to it as well as the wildlife value, the ecological value of that ground, um, at least on some footprint um, for, at least several seasons, if not many, many years to come. So um, we all use this stuff. It comes out of the ground. We just got to pick and choose where we want that stuff to come from, understand what we're giving up for what we're getting. And the rescission of the roadless rule, when we talk about 58, 59 million acres, that's a pretty broad stroke. And what I would like to see, right, is that scalpel approach, and saying, okay, this area, this area, this area, they make sense, versus let's just roll back the entire 60 million acres. Because onX is a great tool for finding those spots that don't have roads and don't have trails, as much as it is a tool for finding roads and trails.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much in that with the roadless rule, and I haven't studied enough as I should, but I remember, seeing some stat about how many wildfires are started along roads. Because with people comes roads, and I've heard that argument of we need to build these roads to better fight fires. That's true, I'm sure, in some cases, but in other cases, it sure seems like that we could be starting more fires with just more recreation and more people out in the woods. So there's so many considerations with
Well,
that.
yeah, and every drainage is different, right?
Hmm.
So um making these broad plans, to it just doesn't make sense to suppress fire in total or let fire run in total. And that's why each drainage has typically a local representative on the ground that can say, hey, this one is something that we've wanted to burn forever. We're happy the fire started in there. Let that thing run.
Hmm.
And the next drainage over can be like, oh my gosh, that is endangered species, whatever habitat. We'd like to suppress that thing as soon as possible before it gets to, something of critical concern. Right.
Right.
So, and that is one of the very concerning things that we're seeing right now. Um, is like, where you're based right now, Jack, they're making the move to shut down the regional office there for USDA, Forest Service. And I'm very concerned that we're going to lose those local voices on the ground that actually know what's going on. Like, what is good timber to cut, and what we need to leave in certain areas, where we could build roads if we needed to, and where we shouldn't, right? Because you're exactly right. Like, humans mess things up. The more people that you can put in one spot, the more likelihood you have of messing things up. And that doesn't mean just fire, right? It can be noxious weeds, invasive grasses, invasive species. Um, and humans like the path of least resistance. So, like, we're going to follow a well-established trail, if not a road. Just how we move.
Yeah. And there was another thing you mentioned in there that I think more people need to know about when it comes to public lands and this talk about revenue is the hard rock mining on public lands. Um, would you mind letting everybody know what the royalty rate is for that kind of mining on our federal lands currently?
Well, surface acres are they still at the 1872? We'll have to fact check this.
1874, I believe.
1874 Mining Act, which is $5 an acre, um, which may have been steep at some time, but I don't think it was. Um, and then there's some other taxes in there too that get a little bit more, but that is something, like, if we're talking about like the value uh, in relation to the national debt, that's something that is oddly conspicuously out of the conversation.
Yeah, it seems like for the average Joe like me or you, it seems hard to find an argument for why we wouldn't want mining companies to pay for the American people's, our minerals. We do it for oil and gas. whether it's offshore or in eastern Montana, there's an oil pump on public lands. There's a royalty rate that the American people receive for their oil, right? We're all owners in that. But the
Yeah,
Hard
we
Rock
get
Mining
the
Act
Land
was
and
as
Water
well.
Conservation Fund is an excise tax on offshore oil and gas. And there's literally not a county in the US that hasn't used LWCF funds to improve things for the public. It could be a municipal swimming pool, it could be bike paths, boat ramps, and it could be the acquisition of easements to public land and public water. That's a heck of a program. So, and that's another great example of something that has been batted around. There's an idea that LWCF funding, which again we use for the betterment of public access to the outdoors, um, could be used to address national park maintenance backlogs, which is just not it's illegal, but it's not what it's for, right? So on the mining side of things, that's a whole nother conversation where the how the GDP works and the ratio to debt that we need to keep the U.S. in good economic status. But I do think that a revision of the mining acts would be in everybody's best interest for sure. So
Yeah, that was just always something I remember when they were talking about. You often hear people say, "Oh, these lands don't generate revenue. They don't work in the ledger book," which is just not true, of course. But I was always like, well, there's a way we could extract more revenue out of them just by, addressing that 151-year-old law that I believe it was President U.S. Grant signed into law back in the day. So, um, we are coming up on an hour here. There's a couple other, well, there's a ton of good questions in here that we won't be able to get to. If we get back to kind of talking about our reps and senators, Matthew asked, where can I see how my reps and senators are voting? How do I find that information?
that's a great question. Uh, I'd like everybody to get used to going over to the federalregister.gov. That's kind of the daily journal of what's happening in the government, and it's produced uh, by the government. So there's really no middle person there. And then um, you can every individual has a published voting record, and you can hit the links to your representatives and senators there, and then there's a lot of groups that will publish that information as well. But it absolutely does exist.
There was a question. I already answered it, so I forgot the gentleman's name, but had asked if there was a way to see what lands are marked for disposal or possibly up for sale. I'm going to put that link in the chat right now. So there's actually two links in the chat. So if everybody wants to enter the giveaway, there's a link in there, as well as the map that onX produced showing all of those BLM lands that were marked for disposal. Like Cal said, some of them even back into the 70s. So you can take a look at those. I believe they're all west of the Mississippi, all of those lands on that map, some in the Dakotas, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and then every other Western state is included in there. So if folks want to take a look at that, especially if you're residing in the West, there might be some parcels nearby you that you've recreated on that you're familiar with. So take a look at that.
Um, the big thing is to, like, we've hit it a couple of times, but stay educated, stay vigilant, look at multiple sources. um there's a good recent thing that came up, right? I'm not sure if everybody saw like the Sherpa vehicle, which is a really badass all-terrain floating vehicle that was working in Montana waters, literally in the water, driving down the river, and everybody was up in arms over this thing. And I'll tell you right now, like I don't like seeing it. It's not visually appealing. I don't like the idea of any sort of a vehicle driving down the river. But that vehicle was there because it was working with a contractor to mitigate, get rid of invasive weeds, noxious weeds. And I think the sight of the vehicle really was so inflammatory that unfortunately, like another good opportunity to focus on the real issue, which is noxious weeds and how they leach water out of the soil. They increase the likelihood of fire, and they literally kill the ability for animals to feed because they block out the good native vegetation. Um, kind of got rolled over on that one. So um, that's a good like example to me of like kind of getting lost in the inflammation, the hyperbole. Like we want to be timely, we want to be accurate, but don't let accuracy get in the way of, or I'm sorry, don't let timeliness get in the way of being accurate, right? So slow down a little bit, try to read your sources and see what the real issue is. Um, our next big spring flood will wipe away any bad things that amphibious vehicle did in the river. But those noxious weeds are still going to be there. And if our outdoors communities would get really riled up about noxious weeds, we'd have a better landscape out there. So um, just kind of an odd recent example of where you need to get educated, pay attention to what's going on, look at multiple sources. Um, don't trust me just because I'm here. Fact check the things that I said and come up with your own opinions, and then keep our elected officials, the places where we buy things, accountable for what you find out there, right? So
Yeah, that story was something I saw it too, and I was immediately like, what the hell are they doing? Why would you do that? But I remember getting a piece of advice years ago that it had nothing to do with hunting or fishing. It was just kind of the crazy news cycle we found ourselves in over the last decade or two. And it was like kind of the 72-hour rule. Just wait for information to come out. Sometimes, you know, we get emotional and logic kind of goes out the window sometimes. Not that people didn't have a right to be angry about something like that, but so many times it's like, man, just hold on a beat, let let information come out and then form an opinion. And I've found that to be helpful in quite a few things. um we're about at time here. um Anything else you want to say, Cal, or any, parting words for the folks?
um, yeah, we kind of talked about this before, but if you're not involved in this thing, these issues, that's fine. Just be aware that other people will be, and they're going to be speaking on your behalf. And that could align with your views, and it may not. Um, it's very important to be aware. You can pick and choose how you weigh in and when you weigh in. Part of what you get from uh, your membership dollars at the organizations like Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Um, TRCP is a good one to donate to. They're not a membership organization, but oftentimes you'll get a representative in the room, and so sign up for those newsletters like we were talking about. see what that organization is doing, and if it aligns with your values, get a membership. And your job's kind of not done then either. You can write into that organization, and you should, and make sure that you're holding them accountable for the reason that you signed up. And then when you're writing and emailing, you can also show up and testify, and it's not as scary as it sounds to go in and testify at a committee meeting. Your voice really matters, and it's never just going to be your voice. It's going to be your voice as well as a bunch of others and organizations and businesses. And if you feel like you're preaching to the choir, you probably are. But as Jack pointed out earlier, it's not that hard to reach out to a different community, because typically, if you just look within your own family and friend circle, you're going to be able to talk to somebody really easily who kind of represents another side of the political spectrum or another user group. And those conversations matter. And chances are, if you're willing to listen, you're going to, like I said, find that in the middle of that Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap on this stuff. So keep reading stuff and voicing your opinion, and get out there and chat with folks. Show up to the rallies, show up to the pint nights, and weigh in where you can.
Yeah, I just want to leave people with a few things. I used to tell my sophomore and junior history students in class, it's the country's run by the people who show up. And if we don't show up, somebody will. Like you said, they're going to advocate on your behalf, whether it's something you like or you don't. And I had a teacher, probably one of the best things I learned in school was we get the government we deserve. So if we show up and we're active participants in our government, we tend to get a little bit better results. And if we don't participate, I had a teacher, I think it was the same teacher who said democracy is not a spectator sport. We're all participants in it. So we can't sit on the sidelines and complain about the results if we didn't put forth any effort. So want to
That's the
thank
truth.
Cal, and thanks everybody for joining us. Apologies to everybody whose question we didn't get to. There was a lot of really good ones in there. So we might have to do some more classes like this in the future, maybe make it an annual thing, and keep a pulse check on what's going on and what we can do. So
Yeah, if we'll Jack and I'll link up, and we'll maybe address some of the big themes on the Cal's Week in Review podcast, and or we can do a blog post, knock out a couple of Q&As there. So
awesome. Absolutely. Well, thanks again, folks. Hope everybody has a good evening. And let's not forget, there's already some hunting seasons going. The rest of them will be starting up pretty soon. So don't forget to take the time in the midst of all the advocacy to get out and enjoy your public lands and get after it this fall.
and be an awesome representative. You're going to be the representative of every hunter out there, whether you like it or not. So be courteous.
Well said. Thanks again. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.